In the 93rd year of the Fourth Age, when the memory of the War of the Ring had become legend among the common folk, a darkness stirred once more in the forgotten places of Middle-earth. The white tower of Ecthelion gleamed beneath the autumn sun, yet within its marble hall, King Elisar paced with troubled brow. "My lord," spoke Faramir, Prince of Ithilien, as he entered the throne room with measured steps. The reports from the eastern borders grow more troubling with each passing day. Aragorn turned from the great window that looked out upon the Pelennor field. Though the years had touched his temples with silver, his eyes remained keen as a ranger's blade. "Tell me of Amon Hen, old friend. The Hill of Sight stands abandoned, as it has these many years since the Fellowship passed that way. Yet the rangers speak of strange lights dancing about the broken stones of the ancient watchtower, and stranger still." Faramir paused, his weathered face grave. "They say the stones themselves weep blood at nightfall." The king's hand moved instinctively to Anduril's hilt. "Blood? Are you certain of this report?" "3 separate companies have witnessed it, my lord. Captain Damrod himself rode to investigate, and he swears by the valor that he saw crimson tears flow from the very foundations of the tower. More disturbing still, he reports that the stars themselves seem dimmed when viewed from that accursed hill." Aragorn walked to the great map that adorned the eastern wall, his fingers tracing the line of the Anduin northward to the falls of Roro. "And what of the lake itself? Any word from the guardians of Lothlorien? Lady Galadriel departed over the sea long ago, as you know. Yet the few elves who remain in the Golden Wood speak of ripples upon Nen Hithwil that move against wind and current. They say something stirs beneath the waters, something that should long have remained at rest." The weight of kingship pressed heavy upon Aragorn's shoulders. In the years of peace that followed the destruction of the ring, he had hoped that such darkness was forever banished from the world. Yet he had lived too long in the wild places, had seen too much of the malice that lingered in forgotten corners, to believe that evil could be so easily purged from the earth. "Send word to Legolas in the woodland realm," he commanded, "and to Gimli in the glittering cave. If darkness returns to Amon Hen, we shall need the counsel of old friends." "What of the Shire, my lord? Should not the ring-bearer be informed?" Aragorn's expression softened. "Master Baggins has earned his peace. Let us not trouble him with shadows that may prove to be nothing more than the phantoms of memory, but send riders to Edoras. If the blood of the Rohirrim still runs hot, we may have need of their spears." As evening fell over Minas Tirith, Faramir made ready to depart for the eastern borders. The Prince of Ithilien had gathered a small company of his most trusted rangers, men who had served in the dark days of the war and could be counted upon to face whatever evil might await them. "Remember," Aragorn said as they stood in the courtyard of the citadel, "Amon Hen has always been a place of power. The seat of seeing was built there for a purpose in the elder days. Approach with caution, and do not seek to climb the tower itself until we better understand what force has awakened there. And if we encounter something beyond our skill to handle, then retreat and send word swiftly. Better to be thought craven than to feed whatever hunger may have stirred in that place." With the dawn, Faramir and his company rode eastward from the White City, their horses' hooves ringing on the stone of the great gate. Behind them, the Tower of Guard stood proud against the morning sky. Yet Aragorn could not shake the feeling that he watched them depart upon a road that might lead to endings he could not foresee. In the days that followed, other messengers arrived at the citadel. From Rohan came word that Éomer would ride north with a full Eord if need arose. From the woodland realm, Legolas sent promise of his bow and the silent tread of elven warriors. Even from the depths of Aglarond came Gimli's gruff assurance that Durin's folk would not be found wanting if battle called. Yet, as the reports continued to arrive from the eastern borders, it became clear that something far stranger than any mortal enemy was stirring near the Hill of Sight. The very air above Amon Hen seemed to thicken and writhe like a living thing. Birds would not fly over the ancient watchtower, and the great river itself seemed to flow more slowly as it passed beneath the shadow of that haunted hill. On the 7th night after Faramir's departure, As Aragorn kept vigil in the tower's highest chamber, a raven came winging through the darkness. The message it bore was brief, but chilled the king's blood. The tower bleeds still, yet something stirs within. The very stones sing with voices of the dead. Come quickly, for I fear we face more than shadow and memory. F. Dawn had scarce broken over the White City when the horns of Rohan echoed across the Pelennor fields. King Eomer himself led the Eord that thundered toward Minas Tirith, his golden hair streaming like a banner in the wind. Behind him rode 300 of the finest Rohirrim, their spears gleaming like a forest of steel in the morning light. Aragorn met them at the gates, already armed and mounted upon Brego's son, a great bay stallion bred in the mark. Hail, Eomer King! Your swift coming gladdens my heart, though I would that we met in happier times. When has Rohan ever failed to answer Gondor's call? Eomer replied, clasping Aragorn's hand in the manner of old friends. Besides, my riders grow soft in times of peace. A dash of adventure will put fire back in their blood. From the north came another company, moving with the silent grace that marked the firstborn. Legolas of the woodland realm led a score of elven warriors, their gray cloaks making them seem like moving shadows against the white stone of the city. At his side rode Gimli, the dwarf, his axe gleaming at his belt and his beard braided with silver rings. Elf and dwarf riding together, laughed Eomer. Truly, these are strange days indeed. Strange days call for strange alliances, Gimli growled good-naturedly. Though I still say dwarf horses would serve us better than these great beasts of yours, Master Eomer. As the sun climbed higher, the combined host set forth from Minas Tirith. They rode hard along the North Road, then turned eastward toward the Anduin. The urgency of their mission weighed upon them all, for no further word had come from Faramir's company since that dark message 3 days past. They made camp on the second night at Osgiliath, among the ruins where so many battles had been fought in years gone by. As they sat around their fires, Legolas spoke of disturbing tidings from the woodlands of Ithilien. The trees whisper of unease, he said, his ageless eyes reflecting the firelight. Something moves in the depths of the earth, far below the roots of the forest. Even the great river carries a taint, subtle yet unmistakable to those with the sight to perceive it. Aye, added Gimli, spitting into the flames, the very stones cry out. In Aglarond, we have delved deeper than ever before, yet always we are turned back by walls that should not be there, passages that lead to chambers full of whispers and cold air. Aragorn listened to these words with growing unease. In his years as a ranger, he had learned to read the subtle signs of the wild. The wrongness that his friends described was not the work of any mortal enemy, but something far older and more dangerous. On the third day, they reached the borders of Ithilien. Here the road wound through the garden province that Faramir had reclaimed from wilderness. Yet even in this fair land there were signs of trouble. The flowers bloomed out of season, their colors too bright, and their scents too sweet, as if some unnatural force urged them to hasty growth. It was Legolas who first spotted the smoke rising from beyond the hills. There, he said, pointing eastward, something burns near the river. They spurred their horses forward with new urgency, cresting the final ridge as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Below them lay the broad expanse of Nen Hithoil, its waters dark and troubled beneath the clouded sky. Upon the eastern shore stood the Hill of Sight, and atop it, the broken ruins of the ancient watchtower. But it was not the tower itself that drew their horrified gaze. Around its base, a great fire burned with flames of unnatural hue, green and purple and deep red, like the lights that dance in winter skies. And from those flames rose shapes that had once been men, their forms wavering like heat shimmer, their mouths open in silent scream. "The valor preserve us," whispered Eomer. "What devilry is this?" They found Faramir's company camped in a grove of malorn trees a mile from the hill, their horses picketed and their weapons close at hand. The Prince of Ithilien greeted them with obvious relief, though his face was haggard and his eyes bore the look of one who has seen too much. "Thank the one you have come," he said. "We have watched that accursed place for 5 days now, and each night the flames burn higher. Look there. Do you see them? The shapes in the fire?" Aragorn followed his pointing finger and felt his blood run cold. Within the dancing flame, he could indeed make out the forms of men, their armor glinting, their swords raised, as if in endless battle. Yet they were not solid, but wreathed in fire and shadow, and their eyes burned with a light that was not of the living world. "Who are they?" asked Legolas softly. It was Gimli who answered, his voice heavy with ancient memory. "The faithful of Númenor," he said. "The men who stood with Gil-galad and Elendil at the siege of Barad-dûr. See how they bear the tree and stars upon their shields? They are the dead who fell in the last alliance, and somehow their rest has been disturbed." As if summoned by his words, a voice rose from the burning tower. Not one voice, but many, speaking in unison with the weight of centuries behind them. 9 there were, and 9 there are. The compact is broken, the seal undone. What was divided shall be made whole, and the kingdom of shadow shall rise again beneath the stars. The horses snorted and stamped, sensing the wrongness in the air. Even the bravest of the Rohirrim looked uneasily toward the hill, their hands tight upon their weapons. "We must retreat to safer ground," Aragorn decided. "Whatever evil has awakened here, we cannot face it unprepared. We need counsel, and we need time to understand what force we face." But even as they made ready to withdraw, the flames upon Amon Hen suddenly flared higher, casting their lurid light across the darkening sky. And in that moment, all present heard it clearly. The sound of a horn, deep and mournful, echoing across the water like a call from beyond the circles of the world. The horn's call died away across the dark waters of Nen Hithoel, leaving behind a silence that pressed upon the gathered company like a physical weight. In that hush, they became aware of a new sound, a gentle lapping, as if something large moved beneath the surface of the lake. "Into the trees!" Aragorn commanded in a voice barely above a whisper. "Quickly, and make no sound." They led their horses deeper into the grove of Malorn trees, their silver bark gleaming pale in the dying light. From this hidden vantage, they could observe the lake without exposing themselves to whatever watched from its depths. The flames atop Amon Hen had subsided to a sullen glow, yet the forms within them continued their endless, silent battle. Legolas, his keen elven sight piercing the gathering dusk, was the first to see them. "There," he breathed, pointing toward the water. Beneath the surface, they rise. The company strained their eyes, and slowly they too began to make out shapes moving in the dark water. At first, they seemed like logs drifting with the current, but as they drew closer to the shore, their true nature became clear. They were boats, ancient vessels of Númenorian make, their proud prows carved in the likeness of swans. Yet these were not the boats that had borne Boromir to his final rest so many years before. These craft moved against wind and current, and their occupants sat upright at the oars, their forms wreathed in mist and shadow. As they approached the eastern shore beneath the Hill of Sight, the watchers could see that the rowers bore the arms and armor of the Dunedain of old, tall men with stern faces and eyes that gleamed like stars in the darkness. "The burial fleet of the ancient kings," whispered Faramir. "They sleep beneath the waters of Nen Hithoel, as they have since the days of Isildur. What power could wake them from their long rest?" The spectral boats reached the shore with no sound save the whisper of water against their keels. One by one, the dead warriors stepped onto the strand, their feet making no mark upon the muddy bank. They wore the winged helms and star-blazoned shields of Gondor's earliest days, and their swords gleamed with a cold light that hurt the eyes to look upon. Leading them came a figure taller than the rest, bearing a banner that stirred in no earthly wind. Upon it was emblazoned the white tree and 7 stars, but the tree was withered, and the stars were black against their silver field. The banner-bearer's face was noble yet terrible, with the proud features of the Númenorian kings touched by shadow and bitter years. "Isildur?" breathed Aragorn, and his hand moved involuntarily to Andúral's hilt. Isildur's heir walks among the living once more. But it was not Isildur himself, for that king's fate was known. He had fallen to orc arrows in the Gladden fields long ago. This was another of that royal line, one of those who had ruled in Osgiliath or Minas Anor in the early days of the realm. Yet something had called him from his watery grave, along with the warriors who had sworn their swords to his service. The spectral king raised his sword, and his voice carried clearly across the water, speaking in the high tongue of the Númenórean, Girth and Sauron, Girth and Irk, death to Sauron, death to the orcs. The cry was taken up by his warriors, and their voices echoed like the clash of swords in empty halls. Then, as one, they began to march up the slopes of Amon Hen, their forms growing more solid and terrible with each step. The flames that danced about the ruined tower seemed to welcome them, leaping higher as they approached. "They make for the summit," observed Éomer grimly. "What do they seek in that accursed place?" His answer came from an unexpected source. From the shadows beneath the Malorn trees stepped a figure that made them all start in surprise. An old man leaning upon a staff, his gray robes travel-stained, and his pointed hat askew upon his white head. "Gandalf!" cried Gimli in delight. "How came you here? We thought you far away in the Undying Lands." The wizard's eyes twinkled, though his expression remained grave. "I go not to that blissful realm quite yet, my dear Gimli. There are tasks still to be accomplished in Middle-earth, and I fear this matter touches upon the deepest purposes of the music." "You know what stirs here?" asked Aragorn urgently. "I know enough to be greatly troubled," Gandalf replied, settling himself upon a fallen log with a weary sigh. "Tell me, my friends, what do you know of the Palantiri of old? Not merely the seeing stones that you have encountered, but their deeper purpose? They were made in Eldamar," said Legolas slowly, "by Feanor himself, to allow communication across great distance. Aye, but they were more than mere tools of seeing and speaking. They were anchored, holding the wisdom and memory of the elder days against the passage of time. When the stones were lost or corrupted, that memory began to fade from the world. But what if?" Gandalf paused, his penetrating gaze fixed upon the burning summit of Amon Hen. "What if something sought to restore what was lost, to gather the scattered fragments of ancient power?" "The Seat of Seeing," breathed Faramir. "It was built to complement the Palantir of Osgiliath. If someone sought to awaken its power, they would need more than mortal strength," Gandalf finished. "They would need the willing service of those who knew its secrets in life, the dead of Númenor, who helped build these works in the glory days of their realm." Even as he spoke, the spectral warriors reached the summit of Amon Hen. The flames parted before their advance, and they took positions around the broken walls of the ancient watchtower. The Phantom King raised his sword once more, and this time his words were in the common tongue. "By star and stone, by crown and throne, we claim again our rightful place. The seeing seat shall wake once more, and Shadow's rule shall fade before the light of Númenor reborn." A sound like thunder rolled across the lake as the king brought his blade down upon the topmost stone of the ruined tower. Where steel met stone, light blazed forth, not the warm light of sun or fire, but the cold radiance of stars reflected in still water. And in that moment, every one of the company felt it, a presence vast and ancient, turning its attention toward them like the gaze of a great eye opening in the dark. The very air seemed to thicken, and the waters of Nen Hithel began to churn, as if stirred by invisible hands. "We must away from this place," Gandalf said urgently, rising from his log with surprising swiftness. "What has been begun here cannot be stopped by force of arms alone. We need counsel, and we need aid from powers greater than any that walk in Middle-earth today." But even as they gathered their belongings and prepared to retreat, the spectral king's voice rang out once more across the water. "Elisar, son of Arathorn, you who bear the blood of kings, come forth. Your realm has need of its ancient strength." Aragorn felt the pull of that command like a chain about his heart, for it spoke to the deepest part of his nature. the part that remembered the glory of Numenor and longed for the return of the high days of old. Yet Gandalf's firm hand upon his shoulder held him back. "Not yet, King of Gondor," the wizard said softly. "First, we must understand the true nature of the trap that has been laid. 3 leagues south of Amon Hen, in a hidden dell where the waters of the Anduin whispered among the reeds, Gandalf called for a halt. The night was deep now, and the stars seemed dimmed as if veiled by some unseen shadow. They dared not light a fire, for the glow from the Hill of Sight could still be seen like a malevolent beacon in the darkness. "Speak plainly, Gandalf," said Omer, his voice tense with the strain of the night's revelation. "What enemy do we face? Is this some remnant of the Dark Lord's malice, or something else entirely?" The wizard sat in contemplation for long moments, his weathered hands clasped about his staff. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of vast years and deeper knowledge. "Neither Sauron's work, nor yet wholly apart from it," he said at length. "You have seen tonight the dead of Numenor rising from their rest, called by a purpose they held dear in life. But who or what has the power to summon them? That is the question that troubles me most." "You spoke of the Palantiri," said Legolas. "Could one of the lost stones be at work here?" "Perhaps, though I think not. The Seeing Stones were bound to the will of their users, and none now living has the lore to command them fully. No, this feels different, older, and more fundamental." Gandalf's eyes gleamed in the starlight. "Tell me, Aragorn, what do you know of the oath that your ancestors swore upon the slopes of Mount Doom?" "Isildur's bane," Aragorn replied heavily. "He cut the ring from Sauron's hand, but could not bring himself to cast it into the fire. His weakness doomed Middle-earth to another age of shadow." "Aye, but what of his words in that moment?" "The chroniclers tell us little of what passed between him and Elrond and Círdan at the Samath Naur, yet I was there. I heard what Isildur spoke when the weight of his failure became clear to him." The king's eyes sharpened. "You were there? But you said nothing of this in all our talks." "There are many things I have not spoken of, for the burden of memory is heavy, and some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud, save in the direst need." Gandalf's voice grew distant, as if he looked back across the long years. Isildur knew he had failed, but he was a king of Numenor, proud and strong-willed. He would not accept that his line was doomed to bear the shame of that moment forever, and so he swore an oath. "What manner of oath?" asked Faramir quietly. "That when shadow rose again in Middle-earth, when the darkness seemed poised to triumph, then would the kings of Numenor return to set right what had been corrupted." He bound not only himself, but all his line to this promise, calling upon the power of the Seeing Stones to witness his word. A chill wind stirred the reeds about their hiding place, and somewhere in the distance they heard the cry of a night bird, lonely and forlorn. "But Isildur is long dead," said Gimli. "How can a dead man's oath hold power over the living?" "The dead are not powerless, my dear dwarf, especially when they die with great purposes unfulfilled. Isildur fell in the Gladden fields, with his oath unmet, his shame unhealed. That failure binds him still, and through him all the royal dead of his line." Aragorn felt a coldness settle about his heart. "You speak as if I am bound by this oath as well? Are you not? You who bear Andúril reforged, you who sit upon the throne of Gondor? Do you not feel the pull of ancient duty? Did not that spectral king's summons stir something in your blood?" The king of Gondor could not deny it, for indeed he had felt the compulsion in that ghostly voice, the weight of heritage and obligation that called him to answer. "But this is surely some trap," protested Éomer. "Some enemy seeks to use this ancient oath for dark purposes. Surely we should resist it, not give way to its demands." "That is the crux of our dilemma," Gandalf replied, "for I do not think any enemy has laid this trap. I believe the dead kings have answered their own oath, awakened by some tremor in the music of creation that speaks of approaching darkness. They seek to fulfill Isildur's promise in the only way they know, by reclaiming the power that was lost when Numenor fell." "The seat of seeing," breathed Legolas. They mean to restore the ancient watchtowers, to wake again the network of sight and knowledge that once guarded the West. Aye, but at what cost? The dead have their own understanding of honor and duty, and it may not accord with the needs of the living. They remember the glory of Numenor at its height, when the Dunedain commanded the very elements and spoke with the voices of storm and sea. They do not understand that such power was part of what led to their realm's destruction. From the north came a sound that made them all look up in alarm, the baying of hounds, deep and mournful, echoing across the night. But these were no earthly hounds, for their voices carried notes of anguish and longing that chilled the blood. "The hunt is abroad," whispered Faramir. "I have heard tales of such sounds from the older rangers, though I never thought to hear them myself." "The wild hunt of Numenor," Gandalf confirmed grimly. "The spectral riders who guard the borders of the ancient realm. If they are awakened as well, then matters grow more desperate indeed." "Can we not simply ignore this summons?" asked Gimli practically. "Let the dead settle their own affairs and trouble the living no more?" "I fear it is too late for that," the wizard replied. "Look eastward. Do you see how the light grows stronger upon Amon Hen? With each hour that passes, their power waxes. Soon they will have strength enough to walk forth from that hill, to reclaim by force what they believe is rightfully theirs. And Gondor, as the heir to their realm, will be their first target." "Then we must act swiftly," declared Éomer. "Gather our armies and meet this threat before it can spread." "Nay," said Aragorn slowly, his voice heavy with reluctant understanding. "I begin to see the true nature of our plight. This is not a matter for armies and battles, but for the fulfillment of ancient obligations. The dead kings call to me because I am Isildur's heir, the last of their line upon the throne of Gondor. They will not be satisfied with anything less than royal blood to seal their purpose." "You speak as if you mean to answer their summons," said Legolas with alarm. "Perhaps I must. If this oath truly binds my house, then only I can release it, or see it properly fulfilled." "That is madness," exclaimed Éomer. "You would walk willingly into the hands of the dead? What surety have we that they will not simply add you to their ghostly company?" "None at all," Aragorn admitted. "Yet what choice do we have? If Gandalf speaks truly, then this matter will not rest until Isildur's promise is either fulfilled or formally broken. And I alone have the authority to do either." The wizard studied the king with eyes that seemed to hold depths of stars. "There may be another way," he said at last, "but it would require great courage and greater sacrifice. Tell me, Aragorn, are you prepared to follow the paths of the dead, not as their prisoner, but as their judge?" Before the king could answer, the baying of the spectral hounds grew louder, and from the Hill of Sight came a new sound, the blast of trumpets. Calling as if to war, the light that crowned Amon Hen flared like a beacon, and in its radiance they could see shapes moving upon the slopes of the hill, tall figures in ancient armor, gathering for some purpose they could not yet comprehend. "They marshal their strength," observed Faramir. "Whatever they plan, it will not be long in coming." "Then we must make ready," said Gandalf, rising and shouldering his pack. "There is one in these lands who may have knowledge we lack, one who has walked with the dead and returned to tell the tale. We must seek the counsel of Tom Bombadil, for he alone among those who remain in Middle-earth remembers the elder days in their full glory and terror." And so, as the night deepened and the spectral flames danced ever brighter upon Amon Hen, the company prepared to leave their hiding place and venture into the wild woods of Ithilien, seeking the aid of powers older than kingdoms and wiser than kings. Dawn came gray and cheerless over the troubled lands, bringing no relief from the sense of watching eyes that had pressed upon them through the night. As they broke their meager fast, Legolas pointed to the sky where clouds gathered in unnatural spiral, their edges tinged with the green fire they had witnessed upon Amon Hen. "The very heavens are disturbed," he said softly. "Whatever power wakes yonder, it reaches far beyond that hill." They struck camp swiftly, and rode westward, keeping to the hidden paths that wound through the depths of Ithilien. Gandalf led them by ways known only to the wise, paths that had been old when the kingdoms of men were young. Yet even on these secret roads, they found signs of the growing wrongness. The trees whispered constantly now, their leaves rustling though no wind stirred them. Flowers bloomed and withered in moments, their petals falling like tears upon the path. Most disturbing of all were the streams they crossed, for their waters ran backwards, flowing uphill toward some distant source that pulled against the natural order. "This is not the work of the dead alone," Gimli observed as they paused beside one such reverse-flowing brook. "Something else guides their purpose, something with power over the very fabric of the world." "Aye," Gandalf agreed grimly. "I begin to suspect we face not merely the unquiet dead, but something that seeks to use their loyalty for its own ends." The question remained, what force could command even the oath-bound spirits of Numenor's kings? They pressed on through the day, their pace urgent, though they tried to avoid the main roads where other travelers might mark their passing. The last thing they needed was panic spreading through the countryside, for common folk would see only the dead walking and not understand the deeper currents that moved beneath the surface of events. It was near evening when they reached the borders of the Old Forest, that ancient woodland that lay between Buckland and the Barrow Down. Here Gandalf called another halt, for beyond this point, their road would grow more perilous than any sword or spear could threaten. "Tom Bombadil dwells deep in the wood," the wizard explained, "where the trees are oldest and their memories longest. But the forest has its own will, and it does not welcome strangers gladly. We must go carefully, lest we find ourselves wandering in circles until the stars die." "Is there no other path to this Bombadil?" asked Éomer. "My riders grow restless, and the horses sense something amiss in these lands. Perhaps it would be best if most of our company remained here," suggested Aragorn. "A few of us could seek the Forest Lord's counsel, while the others keep watch." "Nay," said Legolas firmly, "if what Gandalf suspects is true, then we may need every sword before this matter is resolved. Besides, Tom Bombadil knows more of the deep lore than any save the Valor themselves. All our councils may benefit from his wisdom." And so they entered the Old Forest. As the sun touched the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seemed ominous rather than fair, the trees closed around them like the walls of a vast cathedral, their branches interweaving overhead until only scattered fragments of sky remained visible. The horses moved uneasily on the narrow path, their ears pricked forward, and their nostrils flaring at scents that troubled them. Even Legolas seemed affected by the weight of watching presence that pressed in from all sides, his keen senses alert for danger that might take any form. It was full dark when they heard it, a voice lifted in song, deep and merry, echoing through the forest with a joy that seemed to push back the shadows. "Tom's going on ahead, candles for to fetch, for night comes early and dark to catch. Too many shadows, too many fears, too many voices in listening ears." A light appeared ahead of them, warm and golden, moving among the trees with the bobbing gait of someone walking a familiar path. As it drew nearer, they could make out the figure that bore it, a man neither young nor old, with a bright blue coat and yellow boots, his beard brown as autumn leaves. "Well now," said Tom Bombadil, holding his lantern high to illuminate their faces, "what brings the great ones to Tom's country? Kings and wizards, elves and dwarves, quite a gathering for these quiet woods." "Master Bombadil," said Gandalf formally, dismounting and bowing low, "we come seeking your counsel in a matter of great urgency. The dead walk in the eastern lands, and we fear the consequences may reach far beyond Amon Hen." Tom's merry expression grew more serious, though the twinkle never left his bright blue eyes. "Aye, Tom has felt it, the trembling in the deep places, the stirring of old griefs and older promises. The stones remember what flesh forgets, and the waters carry whispers from the drowned lands. Come to Tom's house, where the light is bright and the shadows keep their proper place. He led them through winding paths that seemed to shift and change even as they followed, until they emerged into a clearing where a small house sat beneath ancient willows. Light streamed from its windows, and smoke rose from the chimney in a cheerful column that defied the unnatural weather gathering overhead. Goldberry met them at the door, her beauty unchanged by the passing years, her gown seeming to shimmer with the colors of stream and meadow. "Welcome, travelers," she said in her voice like water over stones. "Tom has been expecting you these 3 days past." Inside the house, all was warmth and light. The walls were lined with books and strange artifacts that seemed to hum with their own inner life. Tom bustled about, setting out chairs and filling cups with a wine that tasted of summer evenings and honeyed mead. "Now then," he said when all were seated, his expression growing grave despite his cheerful manner, "Tom knows why you've come. The old promises stir, the ancient debts call for payment. But there's more at work here than dead kings seeking to fulfill forgotten oaths." "What more?" asked Aragorn urgently. Tom's eyes grew distant, as if looking beyond the walls of his house to vistas they could not perceive. "There is one who never forgot the glory of Numenor, one who mourned its passing and schemed long to see it rise again. She who was fairest among the mire, she who taught the smiths of Ostin Edil their craft." "Galadriel," whispered Legolas in confusion. "Nay, friend elf, one who fell far deeper than the Lady of Lothlorien ever could. Tom speaks of her, who loved order above all things, who sought to heal the marring of the world through dominion and rule." Gandalf started in his chair, his face going, "It cannot be. She fled beyond the circles of the world when her lord was defeated. The void holds her fast." "The void holds many things," Tom replied mysteriously, "but not all doors bar passage in both directions. She who was called the giver of gifts has found a way to touch this world again, though not in her old form. Through the oath of Isildur, through the guilt and pride of the Númenórean dead, she works her will once more." "You speak in riddles," growled Gimli. "Who is this she you name so carefully?" It was Gandalf who answered, his voice heavy with dread. "He speaks of one whose name I will not utter in this house of peace. She who tempted the elven smiths, she who gave the 9 rings to mortal men, the mate and counselor of the Dark Lord, second in malice only to her master." "But surely her power is broken," protested Faramir. "When Sauron fell, did not all his servants fall with him?" "Not all who served the darkness were bound to Sauron's fate," Tom said sadly. "Some had their own reasons for embracing shadow, their own dreams of a world remade according to their will. She who loved perfection above freedom, order above joy, her vision lives on, seeking new vessels for its fulfillment. And she has found them in the dead of Númenor," Aragorn said with growing understanding. "Their pride, their guilt, their longing for the restoration of their lost glory. All these things make them vulnerable to her whispers." "Aye," Tom nodded. "She promises them what they most desire. A chance to undo the shame of Isildur's failure, to rebuild their realm in a form that will never fall again. She shows them visions of Númenor reborn, stronger than before, ruling over all the lands of Middle-earth in benevolent dominion." "But it would not be benevolent," Legolas said quietly. "Any realm built on the compulsion of the dead would be a tyranny, however fair its face. Just so, she who once sought to order all things to her will has not changed in her exile. She would use the noble dead to impose her vision of perfection upon the world, and call it healing." The revelation hung heavy in the air of Tom's cozy parlor. Outside, the wind had begun to rise, setting the ancient willows to creaking and moaning like voices in distress. Even here, in this place where evil had no dominion, they could feel the growing wrongness that spread from Amon Hen like ripples in a poisoned pool. "If what you say is true," said Eomer slowly, "then we face an enemy we thought long defeated. How can mortal steel stand against such power?" "The same way it stood before," replied Gandalf, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. "Through courage, sacrifice, and the strength that comes from fighting for what is right." rather than what is expedient. But she learns from defeat, Tom observed. This time, she works not through rings of power or open warfare, but through the deepest loyalties of the heart. She turns love of realm and duty to kin into weapons against the living. Aragorn sat in brooding silence, staring into the depths of his wine cup. The weight of kingship had always pressed upon him, but now he felt the added burden of his ancestry, the knowledge that his bloodline carried responsibilities that stretched back to the elder days. There must be some way to break this hold she has upon the dead, he said at last. Some word or deed that could release them from their oath and send them to their proper rest. Perhaps, Tom said thoughtfully, but it would require great sacrifice from one who shares their blood. The oath was sworn by a king of Numenor, and only a king of Numenor can unmake it. Then I must return to Amon Hen and face them, Aragorn declared, rising from his chair. If my death can purchase their freedom, stay, interrupted Goldberry, speaking for the first time since they had entered. Her voice carried an authority that surprised them all, though it remained gentle as summer rain. Death is not always the answer, King of Gondor. Sometimes it is the willingness to die that matters more than death itself. What do you mean, lady? Asked Legolas respectfully. The dead kings are bound by honor, as much as by magical compulsion. They follow their oath because they believe it leads to glory and redemption. But what if they could be shown another path? What if one of their own line could demonstrate that true honor lies not in dominion, but in service? You speak of the old laws, said Gandalf with sudden understanding. The right of kings to redeem their people through personal sacrifice. But such acts require willing cooperation from both parties. Aye, Tom nodded approvingly. The dead must choose their path freely, just as the living must. No magic can force a truly free choice, not even the power of she who dwells in the void. But how can we reach them? Asked Faramir. How can mere words penetrate the fog of ancient pride and supernatural compulsion? It was Gimli who answered, his gruff voice unusually thoughtful. Through deed, not word. The dead remember honor above all else. If King Elisar were to perform some act of such nobility that it shamed their current course, what manner of act? Pressed Éomer. The crown, said Aragorn suddenly, his hand moving to touch the silver circlet upon his brow. The crown of Gondor, the symbol of all they fought to preserve. What if it were freely given up? What if their heir voluntarily relinquished the throne they died to defend? A shocked silence greeted this proposal. Even Tom's usually merry expression grew solemn as he contemplated the implication. You would abdicate? Whispered Faramir. Give up your kingdom to appease the dead? Not to appease them, but to free them. If I renounce all claim to the throne of Numenor and its successor states, then their oath becomes meaningless. There would be no royal line left to bind them to this world. But the people of Gondor, began Éomer, will choose their own path, as free peoples should. Perhaps they will elect a council to rule them, or perhaps they will choose another to wear the crown. Either way, it will be their choice, not something imposed upon them by the weight of ancient history. See, Gandalf studied the king with eyes that seemed to pierce to the very depths of his soul. Such an act would indeed be noble beyond measure, he said slowly. But consider the cost, Aragorn. You would not merely give up a throne, but break the continuity of the royal line that has endured since the founding of Numenor. That is a wound that could never be healed. Some wounds are necessary if greater hurts are to be prevented. Aragorn replied firmly, I have been king long enough to know that the true measure of a ruler is not how long he reigns, but how willingly he serves. If my abdication can save both the living and the dead from a tyranny wrapped in noble intentions, then it is a price I gladly pay. There may be another way, Tom said suddenly, his eyes brightening with a thought, one that would achieve the same end without such permanent cost. Tell me, King Elisar, do you know the old custom of the year king? I have heard tales, Aragorn said cautiously. In the ancient days, some realms would choose a king to rule for 1 year only, after which he would step down, or or offer his life for the good of the land, Tom finished. Aye, a harsh custom, but one that recognized a deep truth. Kingship is not ownership, but stewardship. What if you were to invoke that ancient right, to declare yourself year king of all the Númenórean land, with the understanding that your reign ends at dawn on the anniversary of your coronation? That would be, Faramir paused, working through the implication. That would be in 3 days' time. The anniversary of the coronation falls on the night of the new moon. Just so, Tom smiled. And what better time to lay down a crown than in the darkness before dawn, when the old gives way to the new? But what of the dead? Asked Legolas. Would such a gesture truly release them from their bonds? If done rightly, with full understanding of the sacrifice involved, it might indeed, Gandalf said thoughtfully. The Year King custom was older than Númenor itself, dating back to the days when men first learned kingship from the elves. It carries the weight of true law, not merely political convenience. Aragorn stood and walked to the window, gazing out into the restless night. The wind was rising still, and in its voice he fancied he could hear the calling of ghostly horn, summoning the dead to purposes that served neither justice nor mercy. 3 days, he murmured. Will that be time enough to prevent whatever she plans through her puppet kings? It will have to be, said Éomer grimly, for I fear that if we delay much longer, her influence will spread beyond the bounds of Ithilien. Already my scouts report strange dreams among the horses and unrest in the burial mounds of the Mark. Then we are decided, Aragorn said, turning back to face his companions. I will return to Amon Hen and challenge the dead kings in their own place of power. If I can hold them there until the anniversary night, then perhaps this curse can be lifted without the shedding of blood. Not alone, declared Legolas firmly. If you go to face the dead, then you go with friends beside you and enemies behind you, if need be, added Gimli with a fierce grin. My axe has tasted ghostly flesh before and found it wanting. As has my sword, said Éomer. The Rohirrim do not abandon their friend, whether the foes be orcs or phantom. Tom Bombadil clapped his hands together with something approaching his old merriment. Well spoken, all. Tom likes to see courage wedded to wisdom, but remember this, she who moves against you is cunning beyond mortal understanding. She will not be content to match strength against strength, but will seek to turn your very virtues against you. What counsel do you give us then? Asked Gandalf. Trust in each other, and remember that the greatest magic is often the simplest. A freely given oath may bind more strongly than any chain, but it can also be freely released. Hold fast to that truth, and you may yet see the dawn. As if summoned by his words, a faint light appeared in the eastern sky. Not the healthy glow of approaching sunrise, but the same sickly radiance they had witnessed above Amon Hen. Whatever power worked, there was growing stronger with each passing hour. We must away, said Aragorn urgently. Every moment we delay gives her more time to solidify her hold upon the dead. Go then, said Tom, but know that Tom's blessing goes with you. And remember, the old forest remembers all who have walked beneath its boughs with noble hearts. If you have need of sanctuary in the dark hours to come, these paths will not deny you passage. With that benediction ringing in their ears, they took their leave of the house under the willows, riding hard through the pre-dawn darkness toward whatever fate awaited them at the Hill of Sight. The ride back to Amon Hen took them through lands that seemed to grow more unnatural with each league. The very earth beneath their horses' hooves felt unstable, as if the foundations of the world were shifting in response to the supernatural forces gathering near the Hill of Sight. Ancient waymarkers along the road glowed with a faint phosphorescence, and the stars overhead wheeled in patterns that belonged to no earthly sky. They reached the borders of Ithilien as the sun climbed toward its zenith, though its light seemed wan and sickly, filtered through clouds that moved against the wind. From this distance, they could see that the flames atop Amon Hen had spread down the hillsides, creating a circle of spectral fire that encompassed the entire height. "The dead have been busy in our absence," observed Faramir grimly. "See how their power grows? Soon it will be visible from Minas Tirith itself." "And what then?" asked Éomer. "Will panic seize the people when they behold their ancient kings walking once more among the living?" "Worse than panic," said Gandalf darkly, "for many will see this as a sign that the old days have returned, that Númenor's glory can be reclaimed. They will flock to the banners of the dead, not understanding the price of such service." As they drew nearer to the hill, they began to encounter other travelers upon the road, farmers and merchants, craftsmen and minor nobles, all drawn eastward by some compulsion they could not name. Their eyes held the glassy look of those who walked in dreams, and they spoke in hushed tones of visions and promises. "I saw him in my sleep," one merchant told his companion as they passed. "King Gil-galad himself, tall as a tree and shining like a star. He promised that the days of want and fear were ending, that the Númenóreans would rule again in wisdom and justice." "Gil-galad was an elven king," Legolas said quietly to his companions. "He never ruled Númenor, yet this man believes he has seen him among the dead. The deception runs deeper than we thought." "She works upon their hopes and memories," Gandalf replied. "To each she shows what they most wish to see, promising a return to golden ages that never truly existed. It is an old trick, but no less effective for its familiarity." They left the main road and took to the hill paths that would bring them to Amon Hen from the west, where the spectral fires burned less brightly. As they climbed, the air grew thick and oppressive, laden with scents that belonged to no mortal realm. The cold stone of deep caves, the metal taste of ancient armor, the strange sweetness of flowers that bloomed in starlight. It was near sunset when they crested the final ridge and looked down upon the Hill of Sight. What they saw there filled them with both wonder and dread, for the ancient watchtower had been rebuilt in a single day and night. But this was not the crude stonework of mortal hand. It was a structure of light and shadow, solid as granite, yet translucent as glass, rising in impossible spirals toward the darkening sky. Around its base, the dead kings of Númenor held court. They sat upon thrones carved from crystallized starlight, their forms more solid and terrible than before. Between them moved figures that had not been there the previous night, warriors and noble, craftsmen and scholar, all bearing the proud features of the Dúnedain of old. "They grow in number," whispered Faramir. "More dead answer the call with each passing hour." "Look there," said Legolas, pointing toward the tower's summit. "Do you see her?" High above the gathered shades, upon a throne that seemed carved from black diamond, sat a figure that made their eyes water to look upon. She appeared as a woman of surpassing beauty, tall and proud as the queens of Númenor had been, yet about her was a radiance that spoke of more than mortal nature. Her hair fell like a cascade of silver and gold, and her eyes held the light of stars that had died before the world was made. "She takes physical form," breathed Gandalf in amazement. "I had not thought her power extended so far." "Is that truly?" began Aragorn. "It is indeed. She whom we spoke of in Tom's house. She who was fairest among the mire, until pride became her master. See how she clothes herself in borrowed majesty, wearing the seeming of Númenor's glory to mask her true nature." Even as they watched, the false queen rose from her throne and lifted her voice in a speech that carried clearly across the distance. "Children of Númenor, too long have you slept in the halls of Mandos, while lesser folk inherited your rightful land. Too long has the blood of the Sea Kings been content with diminished realms and faded glory. But I have heard your oath, brave Isildur's oath, and I come to see it fulfilled." A great shout arose from the assembled dead, their voices echoing like the crash of waves upon a distant shore. Swords were drawn and raised in salute, their blades gleaming with cold fire. "I offer you what was promised in the deeps of time," the false queen continued, "a realm that shall never fade, never fall to the corruption of mortal ambition, or the decay of passing years. Under my guidance, the children of Numenor shall rule all the lands from the Grey Havens to the Sea of Rune, bringing order to chaos and wisdom to folly. And what of those who currently dwell in those lands? Called out one of the dead kings. What of the free peoples who have made their own laws and chosen their own paths? The false queen's smile was terrible, its beauty. They shall be elevated, noble king. No more shall they struggle with want or war. No more shall they stumble in ignorance or suffer from poor governance. All shall know peace under the wise rule of those who have transcended the limitations of mortal flesh. Peace through compulsion, said Gimli in disgust. She offers them the same lie that Sauron peddled, wrapped in prettier words. We must act soon, Aragorn declared. Each moment we delay, more dead answer her call, and more living folk fall under her influence. If we are to have any hope of success, it must be now, while the sun still shines. What do you propose? Asked Eomer. I will ride down to the tower and demand parley with the dead kings. As Isildur's heir, I have the right to be heard in any matter touching upon their oath. If I can reach them, speak to whatever nobility remains in their ghostly hearts. And if they simply strike you down where you stand, then at least we will know where we stand, and you can carry word back to Minas Tirith. But I do not think they will harm me immediately. Their code of honor runs too deep, even in death. Gandalf placed a restraining hand upon the king's shoulder. There is wisdom in your words, but also great danger. She who commands them is cunning beyond measure. She will seek to trap you with your own nobility, to make your very courage serve her ends. Perhaps, but what choice do we have? We cannot assault that tower with force of arms. There are too many of them, and they are beyond the reach of mortal weapon. And we cannot simply withdraw and hope they remain confined to this hill. They grow stronger with each hour, and soon they will march forth to claim what they believe is theirs by right. A new voice joined their council, that of a raven that settled upon a nearby stone, its black eyes bright with intelligence. The wizard speaks truth, it croaked in the common tongue. Already the lady's servants ride forth to spread her word in distant land. From Foroshel to Far Harad, the restless dead stir in their barrows and tomb. Roak's son? Asked Gimli in surprise, recognizing the speech patterns of the ravens of Erebor. Kark am I called, heir to the chieftains of my people. We have watched the lady's growing power with great concern, for the dead do not distinguish between dwarf and man when their hunger for dominion rises. What news do you bring from the wider world? Gandalf asked urgently. Evil tidings, wizard. In Rohan, the mounds of the kings crack and split, though none have yet emerged. In the Shire, the old forest grows restless, and its trees whisper of ancient grievances. Even in far Erebor, the dwarf kings in their deep halls feel the pull of old loyalties and forgotten oaths. Then we are truly running out of time, said Legolas. If the dead of other realms answer her call, we will face not merely the shades of Numenor, but the accumulated grievances of ages. All the more reason to act swiftly, Aragorn concluded. Will you stand with me, my friends, not as subjects bound by duty, but as companions who choose freely to face whatever doom awaits? Till the end of the world, replied Eomer simply. And beyond it, if need be, added Legolas with an elvish smile. My axe is yours, as always, growled Gimli. Then let us ride, said Gandalf, mounting Shadowfax with fluid grace. But remember, we go not to make war, but to seek understanding. Our weapons are reason and courage, not steel and fire. As they spurred their horses down the slope toward the Hill of Sight, the false queen's voice rose once more in speech, and her words carried a note of anticipation that chilled their hearts. Come forth, Isildur's heir. Come and take your rightful place among the kings of your line. The hour of restoration is at hand. The approach to Amon Hen led them through a gauntlet of the watching dead. On either side of the ancient path stood warriors of Numenor, their spectral forms more solid and terrible than any living man. They bore the arms and armor of many eras, the star helms of the early kings, the winged crowns of Gondor's golden age, the sea-blue cloaks of Dol Amroth's princes, yet all bore the same expression, proud, stern, and touched with the cold beauty of those who have passed beyond mortal concerns. As Aragorn rode among them, many inclined their heads in recognition, for the blood of kings ran strong in his veins, and the dead could perceive lineage invisible to living eyes. Yet, their acknowledgement carried no warmth, only the formal courtesy, due to one who might soon join their rank. "Isildur's heir approaches," one of them called out, in a voice like wind through empty halls. "Let the seat of seeing be prepared for one more king." The crystalline tower loomed before them, its impossible architecture shifting and flowing like captured music. Upon its summit, the False Queen watched their approach with eyes that held depths of starlight and shadow. She had arrayed herself in robes that seemed woven from the aurora itself, and about her brow sat a crown that hurt the eyes to look upon, not because it was ugly, but because it was too beautiful for mortal sight to bear. At the tower's base, a circle of thrones had been arranged, each occupied by one of Númenor's greatest kings. Aragorn recognized some from the tapestries and chronicles of Minas Tirith: Elros, the half-elven, first king of Númenor; Tar-Minastir, the Great; Ar-Pharazôn, the Golden, whose pride had brought about the island's doom. All were present, save one. The throne of Isildur himself stood empty, waiting. "Welcome, son of Arathorn," spoke Elros, his voice carrying the authority of one who had ruled when the world was young. "Long have we waited for this hour, when the last heir of our blood would come to claim his heritage." Aragorn dismounted and walked forward, his hand resting lightly on Anduril's hilt. His companions followed, forming a protective semicircle behind him, though all knew that mortal steel would avail little in this place of power. "I greet you, noble king," Aragorn replied formally, "yet I come not to claim any heritage, but to understand the nature of the oath that binds you to this world beyond your appointed time." A murmur ran through the assembled shades, and several of the dead kings leaned forward on their thrones with expressions of puzzlement. "Understand?" said Ar-Pharazôn, with a laugh like breaking glass. "What is there to understand, young king? We swore to return when shadow threatened the world, to restore what was lost, when Isildur's weakness allowed the enemy to escape destruction. That hour has come at last." "Has it indeed?" asked Gandalf, stepping forward with his staff glowing white in the spectral gloom. "Tell me, noble Pharazôn, what shadows do you see that require such drastic remedy?" The Golden King's face darkened with anger. "Do not speak to me of shadows, Grey Wizard. You who failed to prevent the corruption of the ring. You who allowed Sauron's malice to fester for 3,000 years. We see the true threat, the slow decay of all that was noble and pure, the diminishment of royal blood, the rule of lesser men over the works of the mighty. And you would remedy this through dominion over the free peoples of Middle-earth? We would remedy it through the restoration of proper order," interjected Tar-Minastir. "Too long have the children of Númenor accepted a reduced role in the world's affairs. We built the towers that guard the coasts. We forged the alliances that held the darkness at bay. We gave our blood in every war against the shadow. And for what? To see our descendants rule over a single city, while barbarians and farmers claim the lands we once commanded?" The False Queen rose from her throne and descended the crystalline steps with fluid grace. As she drew nearer, the very air seemed to shimmer with power, and the grass beneath her feet bloomed with flowers that withered and bloomed again in endless cycles. "My noble kings speak truly," she said, in a voice like silver bells and distant thunder. "For too long, the wisdom of the Númenóreans has been hidden under the bushel of false humility. You were made to rule, not to serve. You were given the blood of kings, not to abdicate your responsibilities, but to embrace them fully." "And you are?" asked Aragorn quietly, though he already knew the answer. "I am she who remembers the glory of the elder days. when order reigned in Middle-earth, and every creature knew its proper place. I am the healer of wounds, the restorer of what was lost, the guardian of ancient wisdom. Your ancestors knew me as Artanis in the days when I walked in light, before jealousy and misunderstanding drove me into exile. Legolas started at the name, for among the elves, Artanis was another name for Galadriel. Yet this being bore only the faintest resemblance to the Lady of Lothlorien, as if someone had taken her memory and twisted it into a darker shape. "You are not Galadriel," he said with quiet certainty. "She sailed beyond the sea, and her light was not of this harsh kind." The false queen's smile was sharp as a blade. "Am I not? Perhaps I am what she might have become, had she possessed the courage to embrace her full power, instead of hiding in her little garden realm. But it matters not what you call me, only that you understand my purpose." "Which is," pressed Gandalf, "to restore the broken chain of command that once brought peace to all the lands of Middle-earth. Under the wise rule of the Númenóreans, there will be no more war, no more want, no more uncertainty. Every question will have its answer, every problem its solution, every life its proper purpose." "Under your rule, you mean," said Gimli bluntly, "for I notice you sit upon the highest throne." "I sit where wisdom places me," she replied with no trace of shame. "These noble kings have ruled mortal realms, but I have seen the patterns of creation itself. Who better to guide them in the governance of a deathless kingdom?" "A deathless kingdom built upon the bones of freedom," said Éomer with disgust. "What manner of peace is that which allows no choice? The only peace that endures." Ar-Pharazôn declared, "We tried the rule of free will in Númenor, and it led to pride and rebellion. We have seen what chaos results when every man thinks himself fit to choose his own path. Better the wise guidance of those who know the proper order of things." Aragorn felt the weight of ages pressing upon him as he looked around the circle of throne. These had been great kings in life, men who had sacrificed much for their people and their ideals. Yet death had frozen them in the moment of their greatest failure, unable to grow or change or learn from their mistakes. "I understand your pain," he said at last. "You carry the burden of Isildur's weakness, the knowledge that your line failed in the moment of greatest need. But this is not the answer. The world has changed since your time, and the people you seek to rule have learned to value their freedom above even safety." "Freedom!" spat Tar-Minastir. "What freedom do they possess when they stumble in ignorance, when they repeat the same mistakes generation after generation? What freedom is there in mortality, in the constant threat of war and want and death?" "The freedom to choose," said Legolas simply, "even to choose wrongly, for that too has its place in the music of creation." The false queen's laughter rang like breaking crystal. "The music of creation! Do you think Eru Ilúvatar intended for his children to suffer endlessly, to die in wars over scraps of land, to live in fear of forces beyond their comprehension? I offer them release from all these burdens, at the cost of their souls," Gandalf said grimly, "for what you offer is not life, but a kind of beautiful death. Existence without growth, order without meaning, peace without joy. And what alternative do you propose, Grey Wizard? Return to the chaos of mortal rule? Watch the world slide slowly into darkness as the elves depart and the dwarves delve too deep? Accept the inevitable diminishment of all that is noble and fair?" It was then that Aragorn made his choice, though it cost him more than any battle he had ever fought. Drawing forth the silver crown of Gondor, he held it high for all the assembled dead to see. "I propose something that your pride cannot comprehend," he said, in a voice that carried to every corner of the hill. "I propose the willing abdication of power, the free choice to step down from a throne rather than cling to it beyond all reason." A gasp ran through the assembly of shade, and even the false queen's perfect composure wavered for a moment. "You would give up your crown?" whispered Elros in amazement. "Abandon your people to whatever fate awaits them?" "I would free them to choose their own fate," Aragorn replied firmly. For the greatest wisdom a king can possess is the knowledge of when his reign must end. And I say to you now, noble ancestors, the age of kings is passing. The time has come for the free peoples of Middle-earth to make their own way, for good or ill. He cast the crown down upon the ground between the thrones, where it rang like a bell against the ancient stones. I invoke the ancient right of the year king, as practiced in the elder days. My reign ends with the dawn, and with it the royal line of Numenor. Let the dead find rest, and let the living find their own path to whatever future awaits them. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the whisper of wind through the crystalline tower. The dead kings stared at the fallen crown as if seeing a portent of their own dissolution, while the false queen's beautiful face twisted with rage and disbelief. "Fool!" she hissed, her voice losing its musical quality and becoming harsh as winter wind. "You would throw away the greatest gift ever offered to mortal kind? You would choose chaos over order, suffering over peace? I would choose freedom over tyranny," Aragorn replied calmly, "even a tyranny that wears the mask of benevolence." And in that moment, something changed in the air around Amon Hen. The perfect harmony of the false queen's creation wavered, and cracks appeared in the crystalline tower as the foundation of her power. The willing service of the dead began to crumble. The crown of Gondor lay gleaming upon the ancient stones, its simple silver circlet somehow more potent than all the supernatural grandeur surrounding it. In its reflection, the assembled dead kings saw not glory, but the weight of responsibility, not power, but service, not immortal rule, but the courage to know when to step aside. The false queen's rage manifested in visible distortions of the air around her, heat shimmer and cold mist intertwining in patterns that hurt the eyes. The crystalline tower began to sing with a high, keening note that spoke of strain and approaching failure. "You understand nothing," she shrieked, her beautiful facade cracking to reveal glimpses of something ancient and terrible beneath. "I offer them perfection, and you would have them choose imperfection. I offer them eternal peace, and you would give them war and death." "Aye," said Aragorn simply, "for those are their choices to make, not ours to impose." One by one, the dead kings began to stir upon their throne. Elros, first king of Numenor, rose slowly to his feet, his starlight crown flickering as doubt entered his spectral heart. "Is this truly wisdom, son of my blood?" he asked, his voice heavy with the weight of ages. "To cast aside all that we built, all that we died to preserve? What did you truly die to preserve, great ancestor?" Aragorn challenged gently. "A crown? A kingdom? Or the people who trusted you to guard their freedom?" The half-elven king looked down at his hands, translucent in the spectral light. We died for our people, that they might live free from the Shadow's dominion. And yet now, you would impose a different kind of dominion upon their children. Tell me, noble Elro, where is the freedom in a realm where every choice is made by the wisdom of the dead? A murmur of unease ran through the assembled shades. Some began to flicker, their forms becoming less solid as doubt crept into their hearts. But others, led by Ar-Pharazôn, rose in anger. "Pretty words!" the Golden King snarled. "But what good is freedom to choose when mortals inevitably choose wrongly? We have seen the consequences of unbridled will. Numenor itself fell because we allowed the people to choose their own path." "Numenor fell," said Gandalf quietly, "because its kings believed they had the right to impose their will upon the Valar themselves. The very pride you display now was what brought the wave that swallowed your island realm." The crystalline tower shuddered, and several of its impossible spires cracked with sounds like breaking bells. The false queen's power was intimately bound to the willing service of the dead, and as doubt spread among them, her creation began to fail. "Silence!" she commanded, raising her hand toward Gandalf. Power blazed from her fingers, not the clean light of the Maiar, but something twisted and corrupt, tainted by long ages in the void. You who failed to guide the ring-bearer to Mount Doom, you who allowed Sauron to rise again. What right have you to speak of wisdom? But Gandalf stood firm, his staff blazing with white fire that met and turned aside her attack. I failed many times, he acknowledged, as did Isildur, as did all who have borne the burden of choice in this world. But our failures do not justify the removal of choice itself. It was then that an unexpected voice joined the debate, that of Isildur himself, rising like morning mist from the empty throne that had waited so long for its king. But this was not the proud ruler who had claimed the ring for his own. This was a figure bowed with sorrow and wisdom, bearing the weight of his greatest failure like a visible burden. "My children," he said, and his voice carried such pain that even the false queen fell silent. "I have listened to your words from the halls of the dead, and my heart breaks to see how you have twisted my oath of atonement into a justification for tyranny." "Father," cried several of the royal shades, for many were his descendants through long generations, "I swore to return when shadow threatened the world." Isildur continued, his spectral form flickering between solidity and mist. "But I meant the shadow of despair, not the shadow of imperfection. I meant to return as a guardian, not as a conqueror." "But your failure," began Tar-Minastir. "My failure was mine alone to bear," Isildur interrupted firmly. "I could not destroy the ring because I was weak, because I let its beauty and its promises cloud my judgment. But that weakness does not invalidate the choices of all who came after. It does not give us the right to impose our will upon the living world." The false queen's composure cracked further, revealing more of her true nature. "You speak of failure as if it were virtue. You would validate weakness, embrace imperfection, choose chaos over the order I offer." "I would choose growth over stagnation," Isildur replied with growing strength. "I would choose the possibility of redemption over the certainty of control. Yes, mortals fail, as I failed, as we all have failed. But in their failures, they learn. In their struggles, they grow. In their choices, however flawed, they become more than puppets dancing to another's will." One by one, the dead kings began to step down from their thrones. Elros was the first, his half-elven wisdom finally piercing the veil of pride that had blinded him. "You speak truly, Isildur. We have let our desire to heal old wounds create new ones." Tar-Minastir followed, his great helm flickering as he bowed his head in acknowledgement. "The living world is not ours to command. We had our time, and it has passed. Even our Pharazôn, proudest of all the kings, began to waver. But if we withdraw, if we leave them to face the darkness alone, they will not be alone," said Legolas, speaking for the first time since the parley began. "The elves may fade, but our wisdom remains in the things we have taught. The dwarves may delve deep, but their craft enriches the world. And men may be mortal, but in their brief lives burn fires that we immortals can barely comprehend. The courage to love knowing that loss is certain," added Gimli unexpectedly. "The will to build knowing that time will tear down whatever you create. The strength to choose hope over despair, when all evidence suggests that despair is wiser. These are gifts beyond the reach of those who know only certainty." The false queen's scream of rage shattered several of the remaining crystal spires. Her beautiful form began to waver, revealing glimpses of her true shape, something vast and terrible, with eyes like dying stars and wings that cast shadows across dimensions. "Fools! All of you, fools!" she raged. "I offer you perfection, and you choose the mud and blood of mortal existence. I offer you peace, and you choose war. I offer you certainty, and you choose doubt." "I," said Aragorn, picking up the crown from where it lay and holding it toward the rising sun. "We choose the uncertainty of freedom over the certainty of chains. We choose the chance to grow over the promise of stagnation. We choose to trust the living to find their own way, however dark that way might be." The crown caught the early light and blazed like a star, its simple silver reflecting the dawn with such purity that the false queen's shadow-wreathed form recoiled. Around them, the dead kings began to fade, their forms becoming translucent as the bonds that held them to the world grew weak. "But think of what you lose," she pleaded, her voice taking on notes of desperate persuasion. "The wisdom of ages, the strength of united purpose, the end of suffering and want. All this I offered freely, asking only that you accept the guidance of those who know better. And there lies the heart of your error," said Gandalf, his staff now blazing so brightly that it matched the sun itself. "For who has the right to say they know better than those who must live with the consequences of their choices? Who can claim wisdom so perfect that it justifies the removal of free will itself?" The crystalline tower gave a final mournful note before collapsing in on itself like a dream upon waking. The false queen's form writhed and twisted, revealing more of her true nature with each passing moment. Beauty corrupted by absolute certainty, love twisted into the desire to control. "I am not finished," she shrieked as her power waned. "Other lands, other dead, other oaths. I will find another way. The living shall be saved from themselves, whether they will it or not." "Perhaps," said Isildur quietly, his form now so faint that he was barely visible against the morning sky. "But not through us. We release our oath freely, knowing that our time has passed, and theirs has come. Go in peace, children of Númenor. The watch is ended." With those words, the spectral host began to fade like mist before the sun. One by one, the dead kings bowed toward the crown in Aragorn's hands, acknowledging not his rule, but his wisdom in choosing when to step aside. Even Ar-Pharazôn, last to accept the truth, nodded gravely before dispersing into morning light. The false queen's screams echoed across the hill as her power broke completely. Without the willing service of the dead to anchor her to the world, she was pulled back toward the void that had spawned her, her threats and promises fading into the whisper of wind through grass. As the sun climbed higher, the Hill of Sight stood bare once more, its ancient stones clean of spectral fire. The watchtower that had housed such terrible purpose was gone, leaving only the honest ruins that belonged to this world and this time. Dawn's light revealed the true cost of the night's victory. Amon Hen stood bare beneath the brightening sky, its stones cleansed of spectral fire, but somehow diminished, as if the departure of the dead had taken with it some essential vitality. The very air felt thinner, charged with the echoes of power that had been and would not come again. Aragorn stood holding the crown of Gondor, its silver circlet catching the morning light with no trace of its former supernatural radiance. Around him, his companions bore the weariness of those who had witnessed the passing of an age, the final severing of ties that had bound the present to the distant past. "It is done," said Gandalf quietly, his staff no longer blazing with power. "The dead are at rest, and the oath of Isildur is fulfilled. Not as he intended, perhaps, but as wisdom demanded." "And what now?" asked Faramir, his voice hoarse from the night's exertions. "The king has abdicated his throne. What becomes of Gondor?" "That," said Aragorn with a smile that held both sadness and relief, "is for Gondor to decide. For the first time in 3,000 years, the people of the South Kingdom will choose their own path without the weight of ancient obligations to guide them." Éomer shook his head in wonderment. "In all the songs of Rohan, I have never heard of a king who gave up his crown while he still drew breath. What will the bards make of this tale?" "Seek, perhaps they will make nothing of it at all," suggested Legolas. "For how do you sing of the wisdom to know when not to rule? How do you make an epic of the choice to step aside? You make it a song of sacrifice," said Gimli firmly, "of putting the good of others before the glory of self. That's the kind of tale my people understand, even if we don't often practice it." They descended the hill in contemplative silence, each lost in thoughts of what they had witnessed and what it meant for the future. The spectral influence that had drawn so many pilgrims eastward was broken, and already they could see travelers on the distant roads turning back toward their homes, freed from compulsions they had not understood. It was near noon when they reached the borders of Ithilien, where Faramir's rangers waited with growing concern. The prince's men had seen the lights upon Amon Hen flare and fade, had heard sounds that spoke of great powers in conflict, but they had obeyed orders and remained at their posts. "My lord," called Captain Damrod as they approached, "what news from the Hill of Sight?" "We feared—" "Peace, good Damrod," Faramir said, raising his hand. "The crisis has passed, though not in any way we might have expected. Gather the men. We return to Minas Tirith with news that will shake the foundations of the kingdom." The ride back to the White City took 2 days, for Aragorn insisted on traveling slowly, stopping to speak with any they encountered along the way. To merchants and farmers, craftsmen and nobles, he explained what had transpired, not as a king commanding understanding, but as a man seeking to ensure that the transition to come would be as peaceful as possible. "But sire," protested one lord from Lossarnach, "if you are no longer king, who will rule us? Who will command the armies and dispense justice?" "Those are questions for you to answer," Aragorn replied gently. "Perhaps you will choose a council to rule, as they do in some of the northern cities. Perhaps you will elect a new king from among your own number, or perhaps you will find entirely new ways of governing that have never been tried before. The choice is yours to make. But surely you will guide us. Surely you will not simply abandon us to chaos. I will offer counsel if you ask for it, as any citizen might. But I will not impose my will upon choices that rightfully belong to others." That was the error of those we faced upon Amon Hen, the belief that wisdom gives one the right to command, rather than merely to advise. Word of the king's abdication spread before them like ripples in a pond. By the time they reached the Pelennor fields, crowds had gathered along the roadside, not to cheer their returning sovereign, but to see with their own eyes the man who had given up the mightiest throne in Middle-earth for the sake of principle. Some wept, fearing the chaos that might follow the end of the royal line. Others celebrated, seeing in Aragorn's choice a vindication of their own dreams of self-governance. But most simply watched in silence, trying to understand what this unprecedented act might mean for their own lives and those of their children. The gates of Minas Tirith stood open as they always had, but the guards who flanked them bore expressions of confusion and uncertainty. How did one greet a king who was no longer a king? What protocols governed the reception of one who had voluntarily surrendered all claim to ceremony? Aragorn solved their dilemma by dismounting at the gate and walking through as any common citizen might, his companions beside him not as a royal retinue, but as friends sharing a journey. The crown of Gondor remained in his hand, unadorned silver that somehow seemed heavier than any burden he had borne in all his years of rule. In the court of the fountain, the great lords of Gondor waited in assembly. Denethor's old counselors, the prince of Dol Amroth, the lords of the southern fiefs. Their faces showed the bewilderment of men whose world had changed beyond recognition in a single night. "My lords," Aragorn said as he entered the courtyard, "I come before you not as your king, but as one who bears news of great moment. The crown of Gondor lies heavy in my hands, for it seeks a worthier bearer than I have proven to be." "Sire," began the prince of Dol Amroth, but Aragorn held up his hand. "I am sire, no longer, good prince. I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and I come to offer you this crown as a gift freely given. Do with it what you will. Melt it down for silver, display it in a museum, or set it upon the head of one you deem worthy to bear its weight. But know that I claim no authority over your choice." He placed the crown upon the stones of the courtyard, where it rang with a clear, pure note that echoed from the walls of the citadel. In that sound, many heard the death of one age and the birth of another. "But what of the law?" asked the Lord of Lossarnach desperately. "What of the treaties and the alliances? What of the defense of the realm?" "The law is what you make it," Aragorn replied. "The treaties bind Gondor, not its king, and if you choose to honor them, you may do so under whatever form of government you establish. As for the defense of the realm, He gestured to the assembled lords and guards. Gondor has strong walls and brave defenders. It needs no king to make it secure. Lord Hurin of the Keys, who had served in the citadel since before the War of the Ring, stepped forward with tears in his eyes. In all my years, I have never seen such wisdom wed to such courage. Yet I fear what may come of this choice. Without a king to unite us, will not the kingdom fall to feuding and strife? Perhaps, Aragorn admitted honestly. I cannot promise you peace or prosperity, or even unity. I can only promise you the chance to choose your own path, for good or ill. And perhaps that chance is worth more than any certainty I might have provided. From the crowd of assembled nobles, a voice called out, "What will you do now, what will you do now, Aragorn of Gondor?" Aragorn looked around at the faces watching him, some friendly, some fearful, some simply curious about what kind of man willingly gave up power. "I think," he said, with a smile that held both sadness and relief, "I will go home to Arwen and tell her that I am finally free to be simply her husband rather than her king. And perhaps, if you will have me, I will offer my counsel when you face difficult choices in the days to come, for I have learned much about the burden of rule, and that knowledge may yet prove useful to those who choose to bear it." The silver crown lay gleaming on the stones, no longer a symbol of authority, but an artifact of an ended age. Around it, the people of Gondor began the slow, uncertain work of imagining what their kingdom might become, without kings to guide them. "There is one more thing," Gandalf said, as the crowd began to disperse. "The false queen's threat has ended, but her words may prove prophetic in ways she did not intend. Other lands, other peoples, may face similar choices in the days to come. The Age of Kings is not ending only in Gondor." "What do you mean?" asked Legolas. "I mean that the lesson of Amon Hen may spread as news of this day travel. If one king can choose to step aside for the good of his people, might not others consider the same choice? And if they do..." The wizard's eyes twinkled with something approaching mischief. "Well, we may live to see the greatest change in the governance of Middle-earth since the founding of the kingdoms of men." As the sun set over Minas Tirith that night, its light fell not upon a royal city, but upon a place in transition, where the future was unwritten, and the only certainty was that tomorrow would bring choices no one could foresee. And in that uncertainty, many found a strange kind of hope. 3 months had passed since the silver crown was laid upon the stones of the citadel, and already the changes wrought by that simple act rippled far beyond the borders of Gondor. In the great hall where kings had once held court, a council of voices now debated the realm's future. 30 men and women chosen by lot from every level of society, their authority flowing not from blood or appointment, but from the trust of their neighbors. The transition had not been without strife. Some of the southern fiefs had declared independence, rather than submit to what they saw as the rule of commoners. 3 separate claimants had emerged, each asserting their right to wear the abandoned crown. But these conflicts remained limited, contained by the very uncertainty that had birthed them. For how does one raise armies against a government that itself claims no absolute authority? Aragorn watched these developments from his small house in the Sixth Circle, where he lived quietly with Arwen, accepting visitors who sought his counsel, but never presuming to offer guidance unasked. The former queen had adapted to their reduced circumstances with grace that humbled him daily, finding joy in simple pleasures that royal duties had long denied them both. "A message from Rohan," she said, entering his study with a letter bearing Éomer's seal, and another from Dale, and a third that bears the mark of the Iron Hills. "It seems your example spreads faster than wildfire." Aragorn broke the seal with some trepidation, for he had not intended his abdication to become a movement. The letter's contents both warmed and worried his heart. "My friend, the minstrels of the Mark sing a new song these days, not of battles won or enemies defeated, but of a king who chose wisdom over power. The older lords think it madness, but the younger ones speak of it with wonder. Some ask whether Rohan too might benefit from choosing its own path, rather than following the will of the Eorlingas alone. I confess, I begin to see merit in their questions. Your example has shown us that there are forms of courage we had not considered. Eomer, and the others? Arwen asked, noting his expression. King Bard speaks of establishing a council to share his authority in Dale. The Lord of the Iron Hills writes of choosing his successor through trial and deed rather than birth alone. Even from Lothlorien comes word that the remaining elves debate new forms of governance for the sanctuaries they establish in the mortal land. You seem troubled by this news. Aragorn set the letters aside and walked to the window that looked out over the lower circles of the city. Below, he could see the great market, where merchants from a dozen nations traded freely, their disputes settled not by royal decree, but by arbiters chosen for their wisdom and fairness. I wonder sometimes if I have loosed something into the world that I do not fully understand, he said quietly. When I gave up the crown, I thought only of freeing my own people from the weight of ancient obligations. I did not foresee that the very act might challenge the foundations of kingship everywhere. And would that be so terrible? Arwen asked, joining him at the window. You have seen the corruption that power brings, even to the noble-hearted. Perhaps the world grows ready for new ways of ordering itself. Perhaps, but change brings pain as well as hope. How many will suffer as old systems crumble and new ones struggle to be born? How many wars will be fought between those who cling to the old ways and those who embrace the new? Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door, a soft, measured tapping that spoke of urgent but respectful business. Aragorn opened it to find Gandalf waiting on his threshold, the wizard's staff dim, but his eyes bright with purpose. Come, the Grey Pilgrim said without preamble. There are matters that require your attention, whether you bear a crown or not. What matters? Aragorn asked, though he was already reaching for his cloak. The kind that threaten to undo all the good that has come from your choice. There are those who see the dissolution of the old order as an opportunity for their own advancement, and they are not particular about the methods they employ. They walked together through the winding streets of Minas Tirith, past taverns where former soldiers debated the merits of council rule, and workshops where craftsmen planned cooperatives free from guild restriction. The city thrummed with an energy that had been absent during the later years of royal rule, the vitality of a people finally free to imagine their own future. But beneath that energy, Aragorn could sense darker currents. In doorways and shadows, he glimpsed faces marked by resentment and fear, men who had profited under the old system and now found themselves adrift in waters they could not navigate. Lord Forlong's son, Gandalf said quietly, noting his observation. He claims his father's sacrifice at the Pelennor field earned his family the right to rule Losarnach without interference from any council. He has gathered quite a following among the displaced nobles, and his solution? A restoration, of course. Crown a new king, himself, naturally, and return to the tried and tested ways of hereditary rule. He speaks eloquently of the chaos that must inevitably follow any attempt at self-governance. They reached the citadel as the sun touched the western horizon, painting the white stone in shades of gold and amber. In the great courtyard, a crowd had gathered, not the orderly assemblies of the Council of Voices, but something rawer and more volatile. At its center stood a young man Aragorn recognized as Fastred of Losarnach, son of the Lord who had died defending the city. "See what comes of abandoning the wisdom of our fathers," Fastred was shouting, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "Trade disputes multiply like weeds. The southern roads go unpatrolled. Our neighbors look upon us with contempt, seeing weakness where once they saw strength." Murmurs of agreement rippled through portions of the crowd, particularly among those whose wealth and status had depended upon royal favor. But other voices rose in challenge, defending the council's efforts to establish new forms of order. "The roads are patrolled by those who choose to patrol them," called out a woman Aragorn recognized as a former tavern keeper, now serving on the Council of Voices. "Free companies of guards who serve for wages fairly paid, not peasants pressed into service by noble decree. And when these free companies Demand more coin than the treasury can afford? Fastred shot back. When they choose to serve the highest bidder rather than the common good, what happens to your precious freedom then? It was an old argument, one that had been debated in the council halls for weeks, but here in the courtyard, with emotions running high and old grievances aired, it carried the potential for violence. Aragorn could see hands drifting toward sword hilts, could sense the crowd's mood shifting toward something dangerous. "I think," he said quietly to Gandalf, "that it may be time for the former king to offer some counsel." "Carefully," the wizard warned. "There are those here who would use any words you speak as justification for their own action. Your abdication gave them freedom to choose, but it did not remove the temptation to choose badly." Aragorn stepped forward into the crowd, not as a king returning to claim his throne, but as a citizen joining a public debate. The effect was immediate. Conversations died away as people recognized him, and even Fastred fell silent for a moment before recovering his rhetorical stride. "And here comes the architect of our trouble," the young lord declared, turning to face Aragorn with theatrical anger. "Tell us, former king, do you see the fruits of your wisdom? Do you see how your noble gesture has left us prey to every ambitious merchant and upstart commoner?" "I see people struggling with new responsibilities," Aragorn replied calmly, "as any people must when they choose to govern themselves rather than be governed by others. It is neither a quick process nor an easy one, but it is theirs to undertake." "Pretty words," Fastred spat. "But what comfort are pretty words to the widow whose house burns while the council debates which company of guards to hire? What good is freedom to the merchant whose goods are stolen on roads no lord claims responsibility to patrol? These are real problems," Aragorn acknowledged, "and they deserve real solutions. But tell me, Lord Fastred, what solutions do you propose? A return to the old ways, with yourself wearing the crown your bloodline never earned? How does that serve the people you claim to champion?" The young lord's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "I propose order over chaos. I propose tested ways over untried experiments. I propose the rule of those bred and trained to lead over the fumbling attempts of those who lack both breeding and experience." A dangerous murmur ran through the crowd at these words, for many present had been bred to nothing more than hard work and honest trade. Hands that had drifted toward weapons now closed into fists, and the space between the opposing factions grew charged with potential violence. It was then that an unexpected voice cut through the tension, that of Burgle, son of Baragon, now a grown man serving as one of the council's liaisons with the guard companies. "I knew your father, Lord Fastred," he said, stepping into the circle that had formed around the debate. "He was a good man who died defending this city, not for the glory of his bloodline, but because he believed in something greater than himself. Do you think he would recognize the bitter, grasping creature you have become in his name?" The words struck home with devastating effect. Fastred reeled as if physically struck, his prepared arguments crumbling in the face of personal challenge. Around him, his supporters began to look uncomfortable, perhaps remembering their own fallen fathers and brothers who had died for nobler causes than political advancement. "The Guard was grateful for your father's sacrifice," Bergil continued, his voice carrying the authority of one who had earned his rank through deed rather than birth. "But gratitude is not the same as obligation. We honor his memory by protecting what he died for, not by placing his son upon a throne he never claimed." The tension in the courtyard slowly began to ebb as Fastred's supporters drifted away, unwilling to defend a cause that had been so thoroughly exposed. The young lord himself stood alone now, his face twisted with humiliation and thwarted ambition. "This is not over," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "There are others who share my views, others who remember what this kingdom was before it fell to the rule of shopkeepers and farmers." "Perhaps," Aragorn said gently, "but remember this, Lord Fastred. Power taken by force seldom endures, and never brings the happiness its wielders expect. If you truly wish to serve Gondor, there are many ways to do so, that do not require a crown. As the crowd dispersed and normal life resumed in the courtyard, Gandalf approached Aragorn with an expression of thoughtful concern. "That was well handled," the wizard said, "but it illustrates the challenges that lie ahead. For every Fastred who speaks his ambitions openly, there are 10 who work in shadow and whisper. The path you have set Gondor upon leads through dangerous territory." "All paths lead through dangerous territory," Aragorn replied. "The question is whether the dangers come from without or within. I would rather face the honest chaos of free choice than the hidden corruption of imposed order." Wise words, but wisdom may not be enough to preserve what you have begun. There will be other challenges, other crises, other moments when the people must choose between the security of the familiar and the uncertainty of the new. As they walked back through the darkening streets, Aragorn found himself thinking not of the crowd they had left behind, but of the letters on his desk, of kings and lords across Middle-earth, beginning to question the foundations of their own authority. The change he had wrought was spreading, but where it would lead, even Gandalf could not foresee. "The world grows stranger by the day," the wizard mused, as if reading his thoughts. "Perhaps that is as it should be. Perhaps the time has come for strangeness, for new ways of ordering the affairs of men and elves and dwarves alike. And perhaps," Aragorn said quietly, "we will live to see whether the choice I made upon Amon Hen proves to be wisdom or folly. Only time will tell the tale complete." Above them, the stars wheeled in their courses, unchanged by the struggles of the earthbound. But in the streets below, something new was stirring. Not the ordered perfection the false queen had offered, but the messy, vital, unpredictable energy of peoples learning to shape their own destiny. And in that stirring lay the seeds of whatever future Middle-earth would grow to embrace. 5 years had passed since Aragorn laid down the crown of Gondor, and the midsummer's day that marked the anniversary of his abdication had become something neither king nor commoner had foreseen. A celebration not of royal power, but of its willing surrender. Throughout the lands of Gondor, people gathered to commemorate what they had come to call the Day of Choice, when their king had trusted them enough to let them govern themselves. The experiment had not been without cost. 2 of the southern fiefs had indeed seceded, establishing petty kingdoms that struggled with the very problems they had claimed council rule could not solve. Border disputes had flared into brief wars before being settled by arbitration. The transition from royal decree to democratic debate had been messy, inefficient, and occasionally chaotic. Yet somehow it had worked. The Council of Voices had evolved into something more sophisticated than its founders had imagined, with specialized committees handling different aspects of governance and regional assemblies, ensuring that even the smallest villages had a voice in the realm's decision. Trade flourished under laws written by those who understood commerce rather than inherited it. Justice was dispensed by judges chosen for their wisdom rather than their bloodline. Most remarkably of all, other realms had taken notice. King Bard of Dale had indeed established a council to share his authority, creating what he called the governance of the people and the king together. In Rohan, Éomer had instituted reforms that gave the riders greater say in their own leadership. Even distant realms sent envoys to study Gondor's new ways, seeking to understand how a kingdom could function without absolute royal authority. Aragorn stood on the roof of his modest house in the Sixth Circle, watching the celebrations unfold in the streets below. Banners flew from every window, not the tree and stars of Numenor, but dozens of different designs representing the various councils and cooperatives that had emerged to organize the realm's affairs. Music drifted up from the lower circle, where former subjects now danced as free citizens. "Second thoughts?" asked Arwen, joining him on the rooftop garden she had cultivated over the years. "Many," he admitted with a smile, "but not regrets. Look there. Do you see the children playing in the fountain? They have never known what it means to bow before a throne. They argue and debate as freely as their elders, secure in the knowledge that their voices matter. And you think that worth the troubles it has brought? I think it worth the chance that future generations will find better solutions than ours. We broke the chain of royal succession, but that was only the beginning. What they build in its place will be their own creation, not something imposed by the weight of ancient obligation. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected guest. Legolas appeared on the rooftop with the silent grace that marked the firstborn, his ageless face bearing news of great import. "My friends," he said without preamble, "I bring word from many lands, and not all of it is cause for celebration. The changes you set in motion have spread farther than any of us imagined, but they have also awakened forces we did not anticipate." "What forces?" Aragorn asked, though something in the elf's manner told him he would not like the answer. "The dead do not rest easily when the old ways are overthrown," Legolas replied gravely. "In Rohan, the barrow mounds stir with unquiet spirits, angry at the diminishment of kingly power. In the Blue Mountain, ancient dwarf lords walk the deep roads, seeking to reclaim halls their descendants have opened to democratic council. Even in distant Rovanion, the graves of the Northmen crack and split as their royal dead protest the new order." Arwen paled at these words. "Does this mean our choice at Amonhen was wrong? That we should have found another way?" "Not wrong," said a familiar voice from behind them. Gandalf stepped into view, his gray robes somehow managing to billow dramatically despite the still air. "But incomplete. We freed the dead of Númenor from their oath, but we did not consider that other royal ghosts might take their place." "Then what must we do?" asked Aragorn. "I will not see the living suffer for choices I made in their name." "You must do what you have already done," Gandalf replied with a slight smile. "You must trust in the wisdom of those you have freed to govern themselves. For I bring other news as well. News of how the peoples of Middle-earth are responding to these new stirring." The wizard settled himself on a stone bench, his eyes twinkling with what might have been pride. "In Rohan, it is not King Éomer who rides out to face the Barrow Wights, but companies of riders chosen by their fellows for courage and skill. In the Blue Mountain, the dwarf councils do not cower before their ancient lord, but meet them with reasoned argument and the strength of united purpose. Everywhere, the people you have trusted with freedom prove themselves worthy of that trust. But surely some guidance is needed," Arwen pressed. "Some wisdom drawn from the experiences of those who have faced such trials before?" "Aye," Gandalf nodded, "and that guidance is being given, not by royal decree or wizardly command, but by the freely offered counsel of those who have learned hard lessons. Former kings advise new councils, old warriors train young defenders. The wisdom of ages is not lost, but it flows now through channels of choice rather than rivers of obligation." As if summoned by their words, more figures appeared on the rooftop, not through any magical means, but by the simple expedient of climbing the stairs. Gimli emerged first, his beard now streaked with gray, but his axe still sharp at his belt. Behind him came Éomer, travel-stained but grinning, and Faramir, bearing dispatches from across the known world. "A gathering of the old fellowship," observed Legolas with pleasure, "though we are much changed from what we were." "Changed for the better, I hope," said Éomer, clasping Aragorn's hand in the manner of old friends. "I bring news from the Mark, and from the realms beyond. Your example has become a wildfire, my friend, spreading to places we never imagined it might reach." "With what results?" Aragorn asked. "Mixed, as all great changes must be," Faramir replied, unrolling one of his dispatches. "The Haradrim have established councils to share power with their traditional chiefs. The Easterlings experiment with laws written by those who must live under them. Even reports from distant Khand speak of new forms of governance arising from the ashes of the old. And the opposition? Fierce in some quarters," Gimli growled. "There are those who see any diminishment of royal power as the first step toward chaos and ruin. They fight the new ways with sword and fire, seeking to preserve privileges they claim by right of birth. But here is the wonder of it," Éomer added, his eyes bright with excitement. "In most cases, it is not kings or lords who lead the resistance to these changes, but the people themselves who choose to defend their new freedom. They have tasted self-governance, and they will not easily give it up. Gandalf nodded approvingly, just as it should be, for freedom imposed from above is no freedom at all. It must be chosen, defended, and renewed by each generation that inherits it. Yet, there remains one great challenge, Legolas said, his expression growing serious once more. The false queen you faced at Amon Hen was but one of many powers that prefer order to freedom, certainty to choice. There are others like her, dwelling in the dark places of the world, who see this age of change as an opportunity to impose their own visions of perfect rule. Let them come, said Aragorn firmly. They will find that free peoples are not so easily conquered as they believe. The dead kings of Númenor learned that lesson, as will any who seek to impose their will upon those who have chosen their own path. Brave words, Gimli chuckled. But remember, lad, you no longer wear a crown or command armies. If such powers arise, what weapons will you bring against them? Aragorn looked out over the city spread below them, where thousands of people went about their daily lives in freedom and dignity. The same weapons we used at Amon Hen, he said quietly. The willingness to sacrifice for others, the courage to trust in the wisdom of ordinary folk, and the knowledge that some things matter more than power. And friendship, added Legolas with a smile. For though the fellowship may be scattered across the wide world, its bonds remain strong. When darkness rises, we shall meet it together, as we always have. Together, agreed Éomer, raising an imaginary cup in toast. Kings and commoners, elves and dwarves, all who choose freedom over tyranny. As the sun set over Minas Tirith on that anniversary day, painting the white stone in shades of gold and crimson, the city below came alive with 10,000 lights. Not the cold radiance of Palantiri or the false fire of spectral power, but the warm glow of hearth and home, of families gathered to celebrate their freedom to choose their own path through the world. From his rooftop garden, Aragorn watched the lights spread like stars across the 7 levels of the city. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new opportunities for both wisdom and folly. But tonight, the people of Gondor celebrated the greatest gift any ruler could give, the trust that they were worthy of governing themselves. Do you know what I think? Arwen said, slipping her hand into his as they watched the festivities below. What do you think, my love? I think the age of kings is truly ending, but the age of peoples is just beginning. And that may be the greatest story ever told. In the distance, barely visible against the darkening sky, the Hill of Sight stood silent beneath the stars. No ghostly fires burned upon its summit now. No spectral voices called across the water. The dead kings of Númenor had found their rest at last, and the living had found their freedom. And in that freedom, however uncertain and challenging it might prove, lay the seeds of a future that no king or queen, no matter how wise or powerful, could have imagined or imposed. It would be a future written by the many rather than the few, shaped by the choices of ordinary people rather than the decrees of distant rulers. The nightfall over the broken tower had passed, and a new dawn was rising across all the lands of Middle-earth. What it would bring, only time would tell. But it would be a story written by free hands and free hearts, and that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. Thus ends the tale of Nightfall over the broken tower, when the last king of Númenor's line chose to trust his people with the burden of their own governance, and in doing so, perhaps saved them all from a tyranny that wore the mask of perfection. Whether the choice was wise or foolish, only the children of those who lived to see the dawn would know for certain. But in the moment of choosing, it was enough to know that the choice was freely made.